This is a screenshot from the video Morning Commute to the Studio and Oil Paint Colours, which is an introduction to this video. It's the visual reference I'm going to use to do the painting today. Here's my white canvas, which I've decided to stain blue to paint on, so that any gaps in the paint show the colour blue rather than having white areas of canvas showing. You don't have to do this, but I'm just showing you how I stain the canvas first with a bit of acrylic paint, phthalo blue acrylic paint, or you could use any blue really. And I'm just mixing it with a little drop of water so that I can paint it on really thinly. Just brushing it on nice and quickly. It doesn't really matter about getting it particularly smooth. I just want to get rid of the white canvas. Canvases like this come ready primed with white primer, so they're ready for you to paint on straight away, either with acrylic or with oil paint. You don't have to do anything to them. So that's nice and blue all over, putting the brush in some water so the acrylic paint doesn't dry on the paintbrush. And I'm just using a piece of paper towel to wipe off some of the paint. I didn't want it to be too dark. Now it's dry. I can start preparing some colour. So here I'm just putting out some of the Artisan Water Mixable oil painting medium that goes with the paint I'm going to use. The Water Mixable oil colours that I talked about in the previous video. If you want to find any details about the colours I'm using and the brushes, have a look at that previous video, the one called Morning Commute to the Studio and Oil Paint Colours. So here's some lemon yellow. It's a really thick lemon yellow. Don't know whether it's because it's an old tube and it's gone a little bit thick. Sometimes this does happen, but it's you can see me putting some of the Water Mixable oil painting medium next to it and just blending it in with my palette knife. Makes it easier to mix with the other colours, which are already a little bit looser. I'm just putting the tiniest dot of phthalo blue in. I want it to be that limey green, that very bright, fresh, yellowy green of where the sun is catching in the highest leaves of the tree. If you look on the to the bottom left of the canvas, you can see my phone propped up with the photograph in it. That's the screenshot from the video that I was talking about earlier. That's what I'm working from. I'm not working from the painting that you can see to the left there. That's the acrylic painting that I did last time. So when you're seeing me painting, my visual reference is on the phone. And what I'm doing to begin with is just painting patches of where I can see those lightest leaves. It was that funny shape in the middle, well, sort of top right of the middle that caught my eye, caught my attention in this composition. And right next to it there's quite a dark branch. So the procedure's different for this painting from either the watercolour or the acrylic painting, where what did I do with the watercolour? With the watercolour I painted the sky in first, and then the leaves, and then the branches. And then with the acrylic painting I painted the sky flat all over. That was all done and dusted at the beginning, and the tree was painted on top of the sky. Well, in this case, although the canvas is blue, that's not really the sky as such. It's just giving me a colour to see my other colours against, and to avoid having any white bits of canvas showing at the end of the painting. But what I'm going to do is paint all the greens on. So starting with the lightest green and working down through the values of green to the darkest green. Then I'll paint the some of the trunks and branches in, and then paint the sky into the gaps. You could try doing it in a different order. You could draw first. You could draw all the branches in first if it gave you more security. You could draw on the white canvas with a pencil and then paint over that with acrylics, which would help to seal the pencil marks down. And then you've kind of got perhaps a better idea of where you want to put your patches of colour for the leaves. It doesn't matter. It's just about trying it in different ways and finding a way that suits you. And very often, if I paint the same subject again in the same medium, I will paint it in a different way. Just speeding up a little bit here. In fact, what I've got now is another green. It's slightly more blue than the first green I started with. Starting to mix the much darker shades of green now. So I had that very bright limey green, then a slightly more blue green, and now I'm mixing my mid-tone of green, trying it out with the small brush there. Maybe that's a little bit too dark. Yeah, there we are. I've mixed it slightly lighter now. And so I'm switching to the bigger brush. What I want to do is just cover the canvas with green before I get into the painting the sky into the gaps and painting the branches in. So it's quite a time-consuming process. I'm looking carefully at the different patches of green in the photograph and painting them approximately where I identify that they are. This is an interpretation, not a slavish copy of the photograph. I think painting is a constant process of editing. You're looking and selecting, you're deciding what to put in, what to leave out, what to move if you need to move things. Sometimes you put it down and change your mind. You've got to try it and see what it looks like. What I am trying to do is to put the colour down where I want it and not move it around too much. As the video progresses, you do see me sort of mark into the paint. I change the mark making just to give it a bit of movement. But in general, the colours, as I put them down, I want them to be there. I don't want to do too much changing. I don't really want to move the paint around on the surface of the canvas. It can get a little bit smeary if you move it around on the surface a lot. And here's the almost the darkest tone of green you'll see me use. Keeping the corners dark is an old trick in painting. If you avoid having anything bright in the corners of a composition, it helps to focus the attention within the picture area. As soon as you put anything bright or contrasty on an edge or in a corner, kind of invites the viewer to look there. I mean, you may want, that could be what the painting's about. You might want somebody to look at the corners, but it tends to lead the eye away from the painting. Once somebody's looking at the corner of your painting, they're likely to look at another painting next to it instead of looking at your painting. I skipped a bit just so that you weren't sitting watching me putting green on for too long. There we go. This is about the darkest tone of green, going in these deep shadows. And it's a slightly warmer shade of green as well. It's got some ultramarine in it. And I think a bit of burnt umber went in there as well. It's worth being aware when you're painting that if you want something to look really brightly lit, the best way to make it look bright is to put something dark next to it. Now I need to take a careful look at the colour of the well, that's a big bough, not even the trunk, it's one of the big boughs of the tree that's going to be painted next. So I'm mixing the colour for that, taking some burnt umber and putting it into that pile of dark bluey green I've got there. So I'm looking for, well, I'm sort of making black. That's the ultramarine. Ultramarine and burnt umber, lovely mixture to make coloured blacks, coloured greys. Black by itself can sometimes just look a little bit, I don't know, too nothing. Whereas if you make a black out of a brown and a blue, then you can adjust it and make it either cooler or warmer according to your need. Makes much more beautiful and natural greys when you put a bit of white in as well. So using the thinner brush, so far I've just used 2 brushes. This one I started off painting the small areas of leaves with. Then I used the bigger brush to paint the bigger patches of shadowy leaves. And this one, it's just a flat brush, quite short bristles. And this is quite slow, this part. You can see quite a lot of thinking going on, the hesitation. And I'm referring closely to shapes that the branches make and how they react, how they relate to each other. So when you're painting trees, you can't invent randomness. There's nothing like looking at a real tree to find out how to paint trees. I'm really not one for following formulas. I mean, you can learn a lot, I suppose, as a beginner from following somebody else's version of a tree that's a generic tree, but you learn far more about what something really looks like by painting what's in front of you. Makes you sit and look and work things out. You know, why are there brighter patches? And what happens when the light shines in through those gaps in the tree? What's the difference in colour between leaves where the light is shining through them and where light is shining on them? How can you represent that with paint? There's a patch of yellow you can see in the bottom right hand corner there. Just keep that in mind, because something changes quite considerably with that patch. Once I review its meaning and why it's there. Branches appear and disappear. There's always like a little bunch of leaves in the way where they disappear. Some of them will get painted on later. And I've mixed some white into the grey now, because just here on this main bough there's some light shining in through one of those gaps. Those trees are, it's like they've got windows in them, I think. In the middle of the tree you've got dark shadow, but the gaps allow the light in, like letting light in through the windows. Comes in and it just glances on some of the branches and the boughs. Those little spaces that you can see the sky through, they're the spaces that the birds fly through too. Always amazes me. It amazes me when you see a bird fly into and through a tree, the tiny little spaces they manage to fly through, and the incredible accuracy of those judgments they make. Fascinating. Giving the brush a good wash out with water. Need to change the colour. Use the same brush for another colour. What's this? This is going to be sky, isn't it? Phthalo blue. Just putting a small amount of phthalo blue into the white. Now, it sort of perplexes me a little bit, this phthalo blue, because the tube I've got, the Artisan Water Mixable colour, the phthalo blue is, in brackets, red shade, it says. And I find it, well, it's a bit too purpley for my liking. I would have preferred a more turquoisey sort of phthalo blue. But, you know, I'm just going to work with it. And if you've not got a phthalo blue at all, you could use cerulean blue. If you want a more cool sky sort of blue. Depends which part of the sky you're looking up into. If you look straight up into the sky, the blues are quite often a bit warmer, a little bit more reddish blue, purpley blue. Further down towards the horizon or towards the sun, the sky can look more almost greeny, a cooler sort of blue. Explore your colours. Here's a change of mind. I put a big patch of green there previously, so I'm taking the rag and wiping that out. You'll find with oil paint, if you've got wet colour, if you're trying to paint wet colour on top of wet colour, it will just mix straight in with the colour you're trying to put over the top. So if you're trying to change something considerably like that, you need to wipe off the wet colour underneath. This is quite tricky to do if you're painting up to a dark colour like that. It's easy to pick that colour up on the brush, and then it can mix in with the pale colour you're using and make it well, muddy or not the colour you want it to be. So I'm trying to be very decisive about how I put the colour down, and as I said before, not move it around on the surface too much, because I don't want the colours here to mix together. I'm quite liking the way the marks, well, the brush is making the marks quite strong and quite, they've got character, the marks. white that little bit out there as well. Some green in place I decided it didn't need to be. I skipped a little bit then, just so that you didn't get too bored watching me putting patches of blue on. And I'm back with the pale yellow, which I'm putting in next to some of those patches of sky, and just doing general adjustment and painting that final corner in there. Smaller marks now. As the painting progresses, you see paint being dabbed on in smaller patches. Now here you see a change in the mark making, where I'm sort of just starting to drag the paint around a little bit on the surface in a sort of a wandering line. Before they were like choppy little dabs of colour. Just trying to describe the texture of the oak tree leaves without sort of painting the leaves. Sometimes working from a photograph you can see too much, and it would be tempting to try and actually paint individual leaves. But I'm just trying to find a way of creating almost a language that describes the leaves. I think I'm asking myself a question here about what is the meaning of that yellow patch. I've been painting around it, avoiding the issue. Let's see what happens to it. But here's another brush coming in first. I've got the thin round brush. It's got, the bristles are stained with red, it's not actually got red paint on it. There's a whole branch I missed out earlier, so there it goes. Goes behind some leaves and then it appears again. So I've got to paint the leaves in that it's going to disappear behind. Yeah, that just didn't mean anything, that patch of yellow. It's gone. Because those leaves are in the shady part of the tree. They obscure that branch, that part of the branch that comes in, disappears and then reappears. Joins up with that the branch that tucks round behind the main one. If you can see, there's like that twisting movement I get in the brush. It's interesting to play with. It's hard to describe why I do that. You should just try it and see what happens. Try making a mark where you don't twist the brush, and then try making a mark where you do twist it. It's just as important to play with mark making with brushes and paint as it is with pencils or pens. So perhaps get some pieces of old cardboard and prime them with just ordinary water-soluble household primer, and use them for playing with. Play with your brushes, see what marks they will make. Find which brushes you like to use best. It's personal to each individual. It depends what you want to paint, how you want to paint it, how thick you want the paint to be. This paint I'm using is quite thick. I often paint with paint much more thinned down than this. And I'm actually enjoying getting some quite rich texture in with this painting. Just trying out some marks here. Looks a bit like a moustache, that. Just trying out some marks to imply that there are some leaves that are much closer to. Like I said before, not trying to paint each individual leaf, but just to try and create an impression that some areas of the leaves are much closer to us, while others are further away. So bigger marks for leaves nearer to, and smaller marks for leaves that are further away. And it's a very light green, that. It's where there's light filtering gently through onto the surface of the leaves rather than shining very brightly through. Like those yellow leaves are actually patches of leaf that's much further away in the windows of the tree on the far side, where it's catching the brightest sunlight in the tops of the tree. Here we are. This is much the smaller, thinner brush I'm using now is it's just a soft watercolour brush, and I've used more medium with the paint to thin it down so that it feeds onto that softer brush more easily, just to paint some really wispy little twigs in. All the time I'm referring to the photograph on my phone so that I'm not just painting some generic idea of twigs, but I'm actually trying to follow the natural form of the twigs in this particular tree. Sometimes they do go off in unexpected directions, because maybe there's a little branch going away from you. Some coming towards, some going away, and some going right and left, and every point of the compass in between. I'm just breaking up the fork in the two boughs there, adding some green leaves on top where they're hanging in front of the boughs. Just trying to imply the three-dimensionality of the tree. I'm looking for that much lighter grey now, because there's a few areas on the smaller branches where the light has crept in through the windows. It's just illuminating those little bits of the branches there. It prevents them from becoming too much like a silhouette. Each of those, of course, is a three-dimensional shape, so just those little flecks of light catching on them help to stop them looking quite so flat. There we are. That's sort of finished. Little bits I might come back to later on, but I wouldn't want to do too much detail in that.